What does it cost you when a mistake slips through? If you catch it on paper during pre-con, it's $1. If you catch it after it's built and you got to do some rework, well, let's say that's $10. And if it slides past inspection into occupancy, $100. That's the 1-10-100 rule. Now, multiply that by whatever your last change order looked like, and we're talking about some pretty big dollars. Today, I'm talking with Scott Reynolds from UpCodes. Scott has an architectural background, and for nearly a decade, his team has been aggregating building codes, fire codes, and electrical codes into one searchable AI-powered platform. In today's episode, we get into where compliance mistakes actually start, why so much rework traces back to upstream coordination failures, and how AI is helping GCs and trades catch problems before concrete gets poured. Let's dive right in. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Scott, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thanks for having me on, Eric. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. In your career, you've worked across architecture, design, and construction for more than a decade. And when you look back, what feels most different about how construction teams manage risk and compliance today compared to back in the day?
Yeah, when I started my career, it was such a fragmented and, to be honest, kind of chaotic workflow. Like if we think and zoom into just regulations. So speaking of things like building codes, fire codes, electrical codes, when I was working in these firms, you had to aggregate this information from, like dozens and dozens of different sources, go to the government website, see what's been changed, what's been adopted, go to the plan reviewer, having this back and forth. It's just a completely fragmented landscape. So when we think about kind of like risk and some of these mistakes made in projects, it was just a result of this very fragmented and kind of hard to understand regulatory landscape.
So the mistakes came in not so much as a lack of skill, but more as a result of the fragmentation of the information and inaccuracies in gathering that information and sourcing it?
I would actually say both. I think, one of the biggest is just gathering that information. It's a moving target. These things change every 3 years, typically. They go for major overhauls. There's changes in between. And you're regulated at the county or the city, the state, the federal level, and across different agencies. So, and it's all moving. So you're right. Like a lot of those errors happen in just pinning down, like, what are the codes? What do we got to follow? How do we be compliant? But I would say there is a huge difficulty in understanding the codes and applying those regulations successfully. Like even if you got it in front of you, you know what it is. How do you actually get this into your project and make sure you're compliant? That's a whole nother kind of high friction workflow.
So is that more a case of interpretation?
It often. Yeah. And that's one of the really tricky parts. And I think probably a lot of listeners have dealt with this, but the codes are not perfect. And they have to, it's lowest common denominator. It has to be written for everybody. Every project is unique. How does that unique project apply to the code? There's a lot of room for interpretation. And in fact, the building departments, the fire departments have the authority to interpret it in different ways. And they will across the country at the state level, city level. You can get a lot of differences in how a department or even individuals in that department, like a building inspector, how they actually apply the code. To your point, there's a huge amount of gray area.
So with that gray area, the importance of not only understanding the code, but having strong relationships with the people who are responsible for interpreting and enforcing the code is absolutely critical.
Right. Yeah. Ideally early on in a project, but even better in historical projects. So if you've worked in a jurisdiction like a city, or maybe it's like a county, if you're a GC and you've worked there a bunch, or maybe you're an architect and worked there a bunch, you likely know the people in the department. Now, who you get in that department will change. But if you have a history, you understand like how they typically go about things, but you also have a track record you can bring. You can say, hey, look, guys, your department interpret it in this way, this historical project, and bring that to bear. So just an interesting kind of facet of the industry is like the deeper your portfolio, the more experience you have in a jurisdiction, kind of the more you have to bear in those conversations. You can rely on those historical projects.
That's interesting. And I know a lot of work is being done in the industry to enable the accessing of this information. And even with better tools and processes, where do you still see projects getting tripped up the most, especially internally between design, pre-con, and the job site?
Yeah, I think, to your point, like over time, this information has been aggregated. Like we have focused for almost a decade now of just bringing together this information and making it searchable, layering on AI. So the access to that information has changed dramatically. And I would argue is like, hopefully better than it's ever been, but there are still problems. And like you're saying, like there are different phases in the project, but there's a lot of different stakeholders. The architects writing the specs, they're doing a lot of that code research. They're working with the government to get that approved and get that permitted, but that can get lobbed over the fence to the GC or to the trades. And it's that exchange and kind of handing the baton off to like the next kind of segment of the industry that I think a lot of mistakes happen. There's discord or mistakes between the architectural plan set and the structural, and maybe when the GC is doing pre-construction, the specifications don't match what's shown in the plans. So it's that coordination between segments that I think still suffers a lot. And you see a lot of construction rework as a result of that the mistakes in coordination.
Yeah, so a lot of rework does start with what seems like a minor or small upstream decision. In your experience, why do those minor misses turn into such expensive downstream problems?
To use like a rule of thumb, I'm sure it changes, but there's a saying, it's the 110-100 rule. If you can catch a problem upstream in design, when things are on paper and you're drafting, say it's like $1 mistake. If it gets constructed and you're going to say, then you're trying to fix it and now you've entered into rework, that's $10. If it passes through that, passes inspection, goes into occupation, and then you catch the mistake, that's $100. So it's this concept of trying to catch these mistakes as upstream as possible because it's the easiest to change. And if these things that originate upstream get downstream, the prices balloon and it becomes a major, major problem.
Okay, so that's where we begin to think about the processing of information, the accessing of information so that we can then interpret it. And that's where AI perhaps comes in a significant way. And, we all know AI gets talked about a lot in construction right now. From what you're seeing, where is it actually helping teams today, not in theory, but in real workflows?
Yeah. So, and to rewind a little bit, so we were aggregating all of these regulations. And as we grew the library and grew the coverage, it was becoming this almost like a hard to manage database. So to give an idea of that, we had over 6 million sections of code. And I believe it was over 12,000 of those code sections were being updated every month. So it's just an enormous database that's constantly changing. And we were trying to figure out, how do we let individuals parse the breadth of this code base that's changing and expanding? And LLMs or AI, as we know it today, is kind of dropped on our lap. And it solved this problem we were kind of banging our heads against the wall trying to figure out. And to make this very practical, it just means we can parse those 6 million sections in real time and answer questions for the user. So if you're a GC or if you're, say, a trades on site, you could be on your phone. You could just ask a very simple question, like what is the sprinkler installation requirement, or like spacing, or maybe you're pre-con in the office, and you could ask these questions to AI, and it will pull the codes and stitch together all the related code and give it to you in a very easy to understand format, and kind of like route you out to those code sections. So it's integrated directly into the regulations, but just makes it accessible for hopefully everybody in a firm or in an office or government.
So one of the fears with AI that people have is, yes, it can access this information, but then at times it can put its interpretation or spin on the information, which may be inaccurate. So how is the industry addressing that in terms of giving the information that a professional in construction needs while leaving room for interpretation so that they're able to avoid some of the mistakes or the assumptions that AI can make at times?
Right. And I think that's the crux of it. It basically boils down to the accuracy and bringing a lot of guardrails. So that's what our team spends so much time doing, And I think a lot of it is putting those guardrails in AI to tie it directly back to the code. So we have these libraries of the code, and when you get that AI answer, it has the citations and it's tying back everything to the code, so you can go and fact check and verify. And honestly, just making sure that the AI doesn't kind of like jump the fence and start to hallucinate and make up things. Like a lot of work that happens behind the scene that you don't necessarily see as an end user is constraining it to increase that accuracy, because the threshold is and the requirement is so much higher. Yeah, on the gray areas, it is tough. So we don't want to make an assumption in a gray area, but rather inform you as the end user, like that there is a gray area and there is a decision to be made. But ultimately, like you need to make that decision. The best we can do is equip you with the right information.
I'm wondering, just introduce us to your company just a little bit more so that we can have an understanding of where you're fitting in the industry at the moment.
Yeah, so the company is UpCodes, and we aggregate and bring together regulations into one single searchable database and kind of track that and help tens of thousands of folks figure out how to comply basically with their compliance and track that through projects. So from a very high level, we're basically this layer on top of the codes, just makes it very easy for people to comply with.
So then you're an aggregator of information. Is that a simple way of saying it correctly?
Yeah, and I'd say that's the foundation layer, is the aggregation. And then we build a lot of tools on top of that to help people apply the regulations and coming up specifications and things like that into their project.
All right, quick break to talk about my book, Construction Genius. This is what I want you to do. Go to Amazon, search for the book, read all of the 5-star reviews, because there's a ton of them. Over 50 to be precise. And the reason I want you to read them is because real people wrote those reviews who've actually read the book. And it'll give you an idea of why you should go and buy a copy right now on Amazon. And here's the deal. If you purchase 10 or more copies for your company, and then send me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com, I'll come in via Zoom and do a 1-hour Q&A and a bonus training session with your team at no charge. I normally charge $4,500 for an hour of my time. And again, for you, I'll do it at no charge if you buy 10 or more copies of my book. And the reason you should buy it is all in the title. It's effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS, leadership, strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. So if you're in the construction industry, this book is for you. So you can get it on Amazon. You can also get it on Audible in the audio version as well, narrated by yours truly. And I know you'll really enjoy it. So go out and get the book. And now back to the interview.
So from an AI perspective, is the LLM that you are using, is it something that you've developed yourself, or are you using another LLM that's already established and running your stuff through that?
Yeah, so it's actually fascinating. So we use other LLMs, other large language models from the major providers, the state-of-the-art models. And that could come from OpenAI, could come from Anthropic, could come from Mistral. And the interesting side note there is that is a horse race that we don't bet on a particular horse. The underlying model and the state-of-the-art models are constantly leapfrogging one another.
Yeah.
And we have a system where we actually use multiple models at any given time, but of each of those models, we'll actually swap them out to the most powerful state-of-the-art. And maybe today it's Google and Gemini, but maybe tomorrow it's OpenAI. Maybe the day after that, it's Anthropic, and then maybe it's Mistral. And part of our job is constantly monitoring what are the best models out there and then slotting those in and empowering the engine with those.
So as you're saying that, right, I can think of someone listening to this and they're saying, well, hold on a second. We're still kind of bleeding edge here, right? If we're swapping models, if we're swapping models however often we're swapping models because they are leapfrogging themselves all the time, shouldn't I just say, hold on a second, let me just continue to grind through what I'm doing right now and wait for the technology to catch up and for maybe a single LLM to emerge? What's the argument against that from your perspective, Scott, in terms of, no, you need to get into this now so that you're getting comfortable with the way these systems work?
Yeah, and just to clarify, so we do a lot that all of that model assessment on our side, and that happens behind the scenes. So for the end users, all they do is they go on, they can ask the code questions, they can do the project management, and they don't need to worry about all the data management, all of the underlying model assessment and swapping that out. That's all handled on our end by design. So it's as smooth a process for the end user as possible. And to your question of like, why now? Because I think the power that is and efficiencies that are unlocked today are so far beyond what we've had historically. It really gives I think an edge to people using that to accelerate how fast they work and then also increase the accuracy of their work. Now, the tools will get more and more powerful over time, but as they are today, it's a bit of a giant leap forward.
So then, in your view, there's a lot of articles that are out and about at the moment about the disruption of knowledge work. And so fundamentally, we are talking about when it comes to understanding the codes and interpreting them so that our guys can put the work in place correctly. We are talking about knowledge work. Stepping back for just a moment, where do you see knowledge workers 5 to 10 years from now in terms of the impact that AI is going to have on them and the need for knowledge workers in construction to adapt to the introduction of AI into the industry?
Yeah. And I would say, I think a lot of the headlines you see from these, and often those headlines come from these major AI companies, is a bit hyperbolic. And I think there's strange fundraising dynamics that they have to play into to unlock a lot of the funding that they need to develop these models. And it leads to very hyperbolic rhetoric that comes out. But I can only speak more confidently to our industry. And I think ultimately, there's just not enough individuals and work to tackle the problems. And I'll give you some examples. So in a building department, permitting times are really, really long. It depends where you are, but it could be a months long wait to get a permit. And why is that? And it's because of bottleneck of how much work can we actually process. The work is very manual today and just takes a long, long time. And these plan reviewers are working really hard, but there's only so many plan reviewers in a department. If we can make them more efficient, ideally we can pull down permit times and also make those reviews a lot more accurate in the process. So despite what a lot of other people say, I don't think it's at all about trying to replace jobs. It's just trying to make people more efficient and then also just have a second set of eyes over their shoulder. There's labor shortages in construction today. There's this very terrifying demographic of this large cohort of building officials that are about to retire in the near future. And we're going to be left with a major labor shortage on that side. So I think I view a lot of these tools is just trying to play catch up to the demands of the industry today.
Yeah, it's interesting. Can you share a real world example of how a GC or project team might catch an issue earlier today that would have been missed 5 or 10 years ago?
Yeah. So going back to that 110-100.
Yeah, that's a great model
concept.
Yeah.
And it really emphasizes the importance of catching these things before the concrete's poured or you're driving piles. So pre-construction, taking the GC, I think it's the pre-construction team does a lot of this work. Historically, that's been very manual. So they'll do a review of the architect's work and the engineer's work and try to make sure there's no mistakes that could find their way downstream. Now, the real world example is a lot of the pre-con teams that we partner with and work with today are using AI to answer those code questions, do AI analysis on that, to answer those code questions, to really dig into what does this building need to comply with. And then later this month, and we've been working with alpha users so far, is the specification side. And on the specification side, looking at those contract documents, there's an automatic way to start to QA, QC those specs. So things like, are the products even available? Are the specs complete? Do they reference the right CSI numbering if they're using that? Does it match the plan? So there's a whole QA, QC layer that we're starting to automate more and more on the AI side. So in pre-construction.
So pre-construction is sort of a broad umbrella. At what point do you find your clients using your offering in ways that are surprising you?
Good question. I think perhaps we don't get as surprised in these kind of major categories of companies. So like a GC or a roofer, or plumber, or electrician, or the architect. I think where we get surprised is when other folks that end up touching construction start using the tool pretty heavily. So that'll be people like product manufacturers will use it heavily. They're trying to understand, if I'm developing a product, is it compliant in Florida and is it compliant in California? What's the lowest common denominator for this product? How does regulation change and how does it map? And the platform does that pretty well and pretty powerfully. So we see these edge cases there that are really surprising. And I mean, we're glad to see the tool used in those ways, but to be honest, we didn't necessarily anticipate that usage when we were building it initially.
So would that usage then lead to better designs up front that then lead to more accurate estimates?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it just comes down to transparency. It's just removing any bottleneck to know what is required upfront, so you make the right decision, get all the stakeholders on the same page, so you're operating from the same foundation to make that decision.
It's interesting. What do you think are the limitations of AI right now?
Well, I think there's a lot, despite what a lot of people say. So going back to your point, AI can be very confident, but be wrong. So confidently wrong. And I think depending how you use AI, I think you really need to use the right tools that have the guardrails built in to get it to the level of accuracy which our industry requires.
Now, are you building those guardrails, or are your clients then able to build their own guardrails in once they're using the system?
So primarily we're building those guardrails. So we will deliver that end product that puts the models together, builds this very kind of sophisticated layer of guardrails to get to that accuracy. Now, not to go down a tangent, but we will deliver a compliant answer to you. But some firms like to go beyond the code. And we don't know like what your firm preference is. We don't know how you want to go beyond the minimum required performance. So that's where they can layer on saying like, hey, we have a checklist. I know the code minimum is, X, but we want to do X plus Y. And we want bigger distances. We want more, let's see, like we want less deflection in a stair or less deflection in a floor because it feels better for the user. Like that often can be a kind of a design decision. And we just don't know if you want that. So that's the layer that firms can start to layer on saying like, actually, we go above and beyond the code. We don't only hit the minimum.
It's interesting. So you're functioning mainly in the pre-con area of the business at the moment. Am I accurate in saying that?
I would say that is kind of the majority of it. I will, just point out quickly, like we actually do work with a lot of people on site because as it turns out, if you have a stack of books and let's say you're like a roofer or plumber, electrician, or you're like on site on construction, instead of like throwing piles of books into a wheelbarrow and like wheelbarrowing that around, like there is a very good use case for just going on a tablet, going on a phone, asking like, hey, what's my nailing pattern? How do I do this installation? What is this? Like those kind of day decisions that are pretty impactful and you need an answer immediately. So we do help on that front as well.
And then how do you deal with the tensions that may exist between, let's say, pre-con, project management, and the job site in terms of, again, these issues of the veracity of the information and the accessibility of the information?
Yeah, it's just to zoom out, I guess it goes to our philosophy where we see a lot of different people on both sides of a table. And sometimes there could be a little bit of tension. So you have your architect on one side, you have a plan reviewer on the other side. You have a GC on one side of a table. You could have a build or inspector on the other side. You could have pre-con team on one side. You could have the construction team on the other side. So like we often equip both sides of a table, but our philosophy is just getting the right information and the accurate information to both sides of the table so they can have a productive conversation. I think so much of construction rework happens because they had wrong information or they had different information and they're talking across each other. There's two different conversations and they're not meeting in the middle, simply because they don't have the same set of facts. And our philosophy is just give them the same set of facts, make that maximally transparent so they can have a productive conversation. They don't have to butt heads. Like they understand the challenge and like, let's just get through this and we'll figure it out. And hopefully it'll be less coordination issues. But that can only happen if everyone is operating from the same set of facts.
So with that in mind, and with the understanding that there's tons of different technology solutions out there that could potentially solve some of the problems that we're talking about, how do you work with your clients in terms of integrating the work that you do with all the other software packages that they're using on a day-to-day basis, both to win work and then to manage work?
Yeah, it's a great question. And candidly, like I think we could probably do a better job there. And I think everyone could do a better job. There's just a lot of pain points in the industry. There's a lot of solutions to those pain points. Those solutions don't often talk to each other in the best way. And I think we're all trying to feel our way through where does this work happen? Where does it not happen? And yeah, so candidly, like I think that is an issue in the industry is these handoffs and trade-offs. And for instance, the more information we know about a project, the better and more comprehensive of an answer we can give about compliance. Now, we would love to integrate with, say, like Procore or Autodesk and pull in more information about your project to proactively give you a heads up. Be like, hey, you didn't ask about this, but your structural plans don't match your architectural plans, or your specification is not matching the plan, and start to do that a lot more proactively. So just to tease a little bit of the roadmap, that is exactly what we're looking at. It's how do we give this more comprehensive view of a project and proactively push these things to you before you actually have to ask us what the code requirement is.
Looking ahead a few years, what do you think construction leaders will expect as table stakes when it comes to compliance, decision-making, and risk management?
I think in the future, table stakes will be at least everything's been considered, whether it's by a human or human equipped with AI, but every piece of the project has been considered and analyzed. And I think it's a sad or unfortunate challenge today that these projects are so complicated. It's impossible to check every little pocket, every little detail and facet of a project and understand if it's compliant across every different code, if it matches the specification, if it matches the drawing set. So if we can have a system that automatically checks that all and at least surfaces it so a decision has been made, I think that'll be table stakes. Today, there's just a lot of mistakes that just never even get considered. They just slide right by and no one even knows. They didn't even have the opportunity to make a decision. I think table stakes was like at least someone considered it. They got eyes on it. They looked at it.
You mentioned the 110-100 model, which I really like. And obviously, your system is designed to help at the 1 level primarily so that we don't get to the 10 or to the 100. Is your system useful if you do get to the 10 in identifying issues that could be dealt with more quickly so that they don't compound and become bigger issues?
Yeah, we do. And so I would say, unfortunately, that actually happens a lot. We do work with construction teams. We work with building inspectors. And that's when you're hitting that 10. The reason we focus so much on the 1 is to try and just avoid that at all costs because it is so expensive. But unfortunately, we do work with a lot of people that do find a lot of, just the reality of rework today is like there are a lot of mistakes that find their way into construction. And when they're when they're on site, they're pulling up their phone, they're pulling up a checklist, or they're asking questions, they can catch that right away. And ideally, say your clearance space is not right. Ideally, you can ask and get that answer immediately to fix it right there and fix it before you jump from the 10 to the 100, which is getting into occupancy. So I think just answering those questions at your fingertips immediately, it avoids you jumping up to that next step of pain point.
It's almost not an iterative process, but it's a sort of a circular process of checking your work as you go, using the tools in your toolkit so that you don't compound those mistakes over time.
Exactly. And by different people, like different sets of eyes. So maybe the architect looks at it, then the structural engineer looks at it, the mechanical engineer looks at it, the planner reviewer is going to look at it, the pre-con team is going to look at it, the construction team is looking at it in different ways and through different lenses. And these things are complicated. I think it really takes everyone's set of eyes through their specialty and what they're focused on to have those tools and to really analyze it and catch those things as fast as they can.
If you were giving one piece of advice to a construction company owner or a leader trying to reduce rework and delays in 2026, where would you tell them to start?
We look at rework and how it breaks down, and so much of that can be avoided upstream. So I think it's really trying to put the focus upstream in pre-construction to catch as many of that off the starting blocks as possible. So that could be coordination errors. That could be like we're talking about like design or compliance or specification errors. So I think it's really trying to put the time and energy to where it's going to be most impactful. And I think where it's most impactful is catching these things when they're on paper and they're not poured in concrete.
How did you get interested in the construction industry?
I have my high school AP art teacher to thank for. So I was in high school at the time. Yeah, this, I guess ages ago, but I was in high school and my art teacher's like, hey, like you seem to really enjoy the kind of the structural side of it, but like the 3D spatial side of it. You should consider architecture school. And I was like, that's a great idea. I did a kind of like a pre-college summer program, they call it. I guess, during summer, you just go to like take like a credit in a college nearby. So I did that for architecture. Absolutely loved it. We actually went to that same school, Syracuse, for architecture, studied it. And that just kind of kicked off this whole trajectory.
So you have an architectural background then?
I do. Yeah, that's where I'm coming from, or my side. Now, in the last 10 years, we've worked with everyone across the board, but my formal training and kind of my background comes from the design and the architecture side.
What is the biggest misunderstanding that architects have about construction companies?
I think, and I'm going to generalize this a little bit, maybe, I think it's really the frustration of like when they lob something over the fence And then they get a lot of pushback. They get a lot of fight. There's RFIs, there's change orders. And I think there's resentment for that. Or they give it to the government and the plan reviewer is, rejecting it for a laundry list of code violations. There is a sense of resentment, I feel, but I think people just need to understand like how hard each person's job is.
Right.
Like the plan reviewer doesn't want to, it's not fun saying like you have 30 code violations, and the GCs, it's not fun writing like 200 RFIs and change orders. Like they don't want to do that. It's just because of the current inefficiencies, it is a reality of the job. And like, we're just trying to make this building compliant. We're trying to get it on time, on budget. And it's just really hard with the tools. Now, hopefully that gets better, but that is the reality today. And I think there's an unnecessary amount of frustration between the user segments.
If there's one piece of advice that you would give to contractors to help them to work more efficiently and smoothly with architects, what would that piece of advice be?
I think just a lot of clarification upstream. So before assumptions are made, and like we actually saw this recently, before assumptions are made on site, getting those things clarified as much as possible. I know it sounds obvious, but it really does go a long way. Like the most you can clarify, again, like this same topic of before anything's constructed, resolve those questions and have those uncomfortable or awkward conversations up front so that when you equip your team and the team's on site constructing, they're not ripping things out.
So then your software would help people to be more prepared for those conversations, to identify the areas of uncertainty or risk, and then be able to interact further upstream in a more effective way.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And the way we're positioning it is kind of like a QA/QC platform. So we've been talking a lot about the manual review, but more and more of that will become automated with AI. So it'll equip that. So it just putting, like when you receive a plan set or you receive a spec or a project doc, putting that through the analysis and then lifting out those arrows and having those conversations with them. So doing the analysis right when you get it, automatically flagging the issues and having that on almost day one to clarify.
Yeah, excellent. So tell us a little bit more, Scott, about your company and again, how people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, so we work with everyone across the industry. We love understanding pain points and trying to resolve those pain points. And like we're talking about today, I think there's a lot of opportunity with AI to automate QA/QC, catch these problems before they become major problems upstream. So the way to get in touch with us is through the website. So if you search UpCodes in Google, it'll pop right up, or up.codes in your browser, or LinkedIn. We love connecting with community. We love chatting to people, understanding their pain points. Because at the end of the day, like we're on the same team where we're just trying to make these projects more efficient. And it helps us to understand like how can we apply AI, how can we apply software to these pain points. But we don't know about the pain points unless we hear about it. So we just love connecting with individuals.
That's great. And so who is your ideal client? Who are the clients that get the most out of using your services? We
have a very even spread across the whole industry. So from the beginning, from the owner, developer, the architect, engineer, the building, fire, planning departments, the GCs, then plumbers, electricians, roofers, and then insurance companies. So it's a pretty significant blanket across all those. And then there's homeowners as well. So it's like the ideal profile, I would say, is pretty broad. Like everyone has these code challenges. Everyone's got challenges with the specification or the plans. And we intentionally make the tool very, I don't want to say generic, but very broad to help all those people, because everyone's got these challenges. So we just want to help basically anyone who's touching a piece of construction. That's awesome. So we'll have links in the show notes to your website and to your LinkedIn. And Scott, I really appreciate you joining us here today. Likewise. Yeah, I enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much for having me on. Thank you for listening to today's episode with Scott, and links in the show notes to connect with him through his website and also through LinkedIn. Hope you enjoyed this, found it useful. I'd like that we didn't overhype AI, but I think we properly hyped AI today. So let me know your feedback on this episode. Do you find it useful? Shoot me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com. Feel free to give the show a rating and review wherever you get your podcast. I know many of you have listened to this show for many years, and if there's one thing I could get you to do, it would be to give the show a rating and a review. That would be super helpful. Thanks very much. I'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days.
If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity, and to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.